Chapter 12 Iskandar. Setting: the festival of Yom Kippur. Evening of day 1, 6 days remaining. Headed back out to sea. Intro to next chapter. Note from Kitty to the reader. Our boat is fixed. We can finally finish our journey to Artopia. The boat is fixed, but is not as strong as it was when we first set out. This time we need to leave all our stuff behind. No food or water, we can't carry it. It is Yom Kippur after all. Do not hesitate to dash the things that might cause you to look back. Beware the princes and principalities, strongmen and strongholds that may try to stop you. Do not carry anything too heavy. Throw them into our bonfire. Nullification comes before the baptism. If it seems I travel to Artopia to judge them, then I assure you that I do not. God commands us to proclaim the righteousness of the Lord and confront others in our own sin and God's disdain for it. I was told that Artopia would be destroyed, so I go to them not to reveal to them their sins, but to reveal to them the lies that they have been led to believe, the lies which have caused them to sin. There has been a reverse of psychosomatics, a degradation of the fellowship and covenant we were meant to have with our quantum influence. Our world has been reduced to public facades of luxury and grandeur, majesty's gone bankrupt, spirituality based on revenge and self-deprivation, societal corruption disguised as values, and urban ethos hiding sinful abominations, the sophisms of society. Mankind's towers is not as high as they want you to think. Unfortunately, as we near our end of our journey, a terrible storm commences. As the salmon-pink sky collapses onto itself and the numbing wind takes us someplace else, we lose all control of our boat. We can only hope the resurgent forces bring us closer to the Artopian city. This is where we must go our separate ways. Yes, I can no longer take you with me. As the ghost of Christmas past took Scrooge on a journey through his childhood, I was able to take you over the chaotic seas that began this adventure. Unfortunately, like the ghost of Christmas yet to come, I also had to show you glimpses of the terrible future that might yet be, but also the glorious future after that, as promised by the coming of God's kingdom. And that leads us to the most essential point of this testimony, the heralding of God's kingdom. We have the 3 keys now, but we must be ready to meet God in the wilderness at the appropriate time. In this testimony, the time is now. The 3 keys that we have gone over these past 2 days will help us unlock the doors of the Rainbow Castle so that within we may all celebrate the 8th festival of the Lamb together. In the words of the Lubavitch Rebbe, the table is already set. The Leviathan, Psalm 74 verse 14, the giant wild ox, Job 40 verse 15, and the ancient guarded wine, put aside on the 6th day of creation, is ready to be served. All that we are waiting for now is the Messiah to come down from the clouds, sitting at the right hand of God, at which point he will recite Psalm 116 for us. According to the Rebbe, quote, all we have to do is accept Mashiach and to do everything we can to bring him here quicker. The time is now. Jesus is returning in only 6 more days. The waves rock the boat with tremendous force. There is a chance I will drown, but I do not fear death. I fear dying before I can tell Artopia the good news. I know Jesus walked upon the waters even more turbulent than this, just as Noah's Ark did, as foretold by Job 9 verse 8 through 10. But I can't walk on the waters like him. Instead, my boat seems to be flying over the waters more often than floating on them. I do not resist the winds, for if I do, they will destroy me, and so I dance to their erratic flow. The island of Key people said that the waves would drown me, and so I did my best to safeguard against that. Still, the winds ripped the sails off the raft, and now it is sinking. Giant 10-foot waves collapse over me as I tread water. Only my obsession keeps me from giving up. I must make it back to Artopia. I must save their lives. I only have 6 more days. I must forgive to be forgiven, for I will go on to do terrible things. I'm doggy paddling in the epicenter of the storm, my eyes and lungs burnt by salt. If not for the emergency inflatables, I probably would have already drowned. Although I am doomed to fail, I swim harder than I have ever thought possible. Like a wayward bird drawn to warmer lands and a promise of life, I go to Artopia. I go to where my beloved Rainbow Castle is. Try to read in between my mad ramblings. I made mistakes, but try to understand my good intentions. I was only human, well, humanish. See the sad creature I was, a child tied to a raft of her own incapability and sent out to sea to die. I did, after all, swim madly back towards Artopian shores to try and make things right. I was naive and didn't understand everything that would happen because of it. When I say I'm in between times, And why this testimony sounds like a disposition sometimes, it is because I am telling it on the day of judgment. Before me is a great white throne. Around the throne stands all of humanity. We are being judged individually, but also at the same time. Below us, the earth is a giant hunk of burning charcoal. The Rainbow Castle is functioning as a great ark, an interdimensional galactic spaceship between the old heavens and earth and the new heavens and earth. The chaotic waters I floated above in my raft on the way to Artopia are like the chaotic sea of flames we are all floating above right now in the Rainbow Castle, here, together. I want to live on the new earth. I can already see it forming beneath us, forging itself from the charcoal like a bright, sparkling diamond. I must make you understand. I can talk to you and even interact with you through times and dimensions because of the strange and awe-inspiring properties of the New Jerusalem. The more I swam, the more tired I became, drowning in thoughts and prayers. A wave bashed me 10 feet underwater. I looked up and saw a swarm of fish fly above. I smiled as their scales sparkled like rainbows when they caught the lightning's reflection. Even under the chaotic sea, I thought, there are still rainbow-colored birds. I followed their tiny jet streams until I broke through the surface. Lightning intensified, and I saw the sky open up and light the sea with its electric soul. At that point, all I could see, all I knew, and all I heard was as distant as roaring thunder. I knew the thunder was coming from the Rainbow Castle. It was as if they were trying to say something. The sound of the thunder was what I followed, and the violent veins of lightning in the sky. I altered my course towards the loudest crashes. I knew my Rainbow Castle would be there in the most calamitous apex of the storm. They were the storm. They are the force that shakes the foundation of the world. I counted the seconds between the lightning and thunder to see how far I was. 3 miles, 2 miles, until 1 more mile. Then as soon as my strength gave out, up ahead I saw an artificial light, like lightning but not pure Norton lightning. It was the Sky Dome, the biggest structure on the East Coast, the most significant man-made structure that there has ever been. Inside the Sky Dome was Artopia. Safe and sound, the one who started it all watched the storm from his window. He looked out at the storm as it click-clack menacingly on the soft glow of the illuminated transparency. Once upon a time to be, inside an ivory tower, there will live a tyrannical Marxist, capitalist, Republican, liberal, democratic, communist, terrorist, dictator, president who will be loved by all. Chapter 12, Iskandar. Midrash number 5. The Scapegoat Ritual, 1 of 2, Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, people had to take 2 goats, sacrifice one, and set the other free into the barren land, separated from God's people. The scapegoat ritual is like the 2 birds in the sacrifice of the leper. We are like one of the birds, one set free but marked by the blood of Jesus. Leviticus 14, verse 4. The goat sacrificed on the altar represented Jesus, and the one exiled from the congregation and set free to live in the world without God represented the red dragon or Azazel. The goat for Azazel was marked by a red ribbon tied to its horns. The goat designated to God had the red ribbon tied around its neck. This is all symbology. The Satan can play no part in the sacrificial rituals of the temple, and every animal used in the rituals must be clean and blemish-free, something that the Satan is not. A piece of the red ribbon is cut off before the goat of Azazel is set free. In theory, once set free, the goat would die of predation, a metaphor as to why we shouldn't choose a world that is sin over God. To speed up the process, and since if it returned it was deemed a bad omen, the people of Israel adopted the practice of throwing the goat off a cliff. Quote, "But the unclean spirit, when he is gone out of the man, passes through waterless places, seeking rest and doesn't find it." Matthew 12, verse 43. After all the Yom Kippur rituals were completed, the scarlet ribbon would turn pure white to symbolize that God had forgiven Israel. When Jesus died around 30 AD, the scapegoat that year escaped, and the ribbon remained red. Every year since for 40 years until the destruction of the temple, as prophesied by Jesus in the book of Jonah, the Sanhedrin reported that the ribbon would no longer turn white when the priest atoned for sins. Talmud Tractate Yoma 39b. When Jesus Christ returns, one of the first things he will do is perform his duties as our high priest on Yom Kippur. He no longer has to offer a sacrifice, for he was the ultimate sacrifice. Hebrews 10 verse 11 through 13. Jesus will instead banish the goat for Azazel, that is the Satan, our accuser, from the midst of mankind and lock him in the abyss for 1,000 years so that he can no longer deceive the nations. Revelation 20 verse 2. End of Midrash. Setting. The festival of Yom Kippur, late evening of day 1, 6 days remaining. Iskandar's observatory. Perspective, Iskandar. 15 miles from the shore was the institution. The institution lay in the center of Artopia, and Iskandar sat in the topmost center of the institution. Similarly, the Rainbow City was hovering in the sky directly above Artopia, with the Rainbow Castle at its center, the two cities inverted mirrors of one another. The tower was 2,500 feet tall, 120 stories, and able to house a third of Artopia at a time. The city boasted a population of 1 million people. Iskandar peered out of the glass dome of his observatory, which just barely protruded out of the sky dome. If Iskandar wanted to, he could open a hatch and sit on top of the sky dome and feel the cool breeze of the clouds. The telescreen apparatus of the sky dome did not reach here, in his observatory at least. The actual world would never be masked or concealed. A space between the sky dome and the institution was left, so the building was secured to the dome by hundreds of flying buttresses. From above, the arches looked like an iris around the observatory. At every angle, the sky dome was a giant, unblinking eye. Lightning shot violently through the darkness as rains pelted against the glass. There were no stars. There never was, only violent flashes of lightning here and there. Iskandar looked down at the sky dome, which sheltered the Artopian city like a giant bubble. He ordered whales and other deep-sea leviathans to be projected in it as their songs masked the thunderous groans of the storm above. He watched as they swam around the luminous orb. The beautiful projections concealed the grim heavens perfectly. Looking up at the sky dome, the Artopians wouldn't even know the sky was falling, let alone that it was raining. Unlike his citizens, Iskandar didn't need an artificial projection to make him happy. As he gazed out at the darkness, it was as if it was not darkness he saw, but someplace else, a very real place still not yet attained by him. He had lived for a long time, and could still remember what the real stars had looked like. All the world would still be in darkness if not for him. He arose from the darkness and appeared like a shining star in the void of nothingness to all the hopeless, wandering shadow people in the wake of the last war. A bright morning star like Saturn. He gave their children Artopia to live, one place outside the entire world that could sustain them. Here, it was as if the earth had never lost its paradisical glory. Despite the beautiful lies of the sky dome, Iskandar wanted to show Artopia the real stars, bright, burning, and spectacular. He wanted to be full of that incredible fire of the heavens till he could no longer contain himself in it. Once raising Artopia to the heavens, he would finally have all the power he could ever want. Artopia would explode across the heavens like a supernova. No mercy for the ugly, no tolerance for the imperfect. He would be infinite as he was already immortal. All his creations and servants would be without flaw and of relentless purpose. Iskandar ruled humanity through condensing forces of electricity, the binding forces of electromagnetism, and the destructive and fragmenting forces of atomic materialism. In exchange for turning them into wetware, his people gave him undying loyalty. He was once a biologist, but he had transitioned into astrology, leaving molecular science to his army of doctors. Big Pharma ran the nitty-gritty of utopian life, the implementation of daily conditioning treatments, law, order, welfare, food production, and population control he left to them. As an astronomer, Iskandar preferred to function as a kind of priest-king. Astronomy, like quantum physics, is confusing, so people confuse it with magic. If magic can be framed using the terminology of theoretical science, that magic is real. Artopian scientists could easily take on a mystical tone. True comprehension of astronomy lay exclusively in the math itself, which could not truly be observed or tested in the natural world. In this way, a fixed Earth absolute universe was exchanged for an Earth-wandering relative universe with infinite possibilities, as infinite as the amount of math-magical theories that could be conjured up to explain it. Everyone had to be satisfied with hollow, often misleading conceptual explanations, which was how everything Artopia was explained to the masses, dissociating society from reality and making them more easy to control. The once New Age religion was now a science. Iskandar used astronomy as a stand-in for spirituality without the social practices and conservatism of biblical faith. It kept the perceived ties to the ancient world while also being able to make wild, unsubstantiated claims about reality. Through his gospel of the stars, Iskandar gave the populace transcendence, interconnectedness, and self-empowerment, all without any of the burdens of organized religion. Science proved many ridiculous things throughout history, such as spontaneous generation, maternal impression, and glacier cosmology, which stated that ice is the basic substance of all cosmic processes, and that ice moons and ice planets determine the entire development of the universe. The National Socialist Party in Germany, Adolf Hitler, the general public, and most prominent scientists of the world believed in this ice theory, and it only fell out of fashion because Germany fell out of fashion. With enough power, credibility, and social support, Iskander could convince anyone of anything. And he had. He had convinced mankind that he and the dragon would take them to paradise-like planets in outer space. But it was not the outer space that they were conditioned to believe, but a hellish abyss intended only for the devil and his demons. A knock came from the door.
"Come in,"
said Iskander, yanking himself from his imaginings. A skinny man in his 20s appeared. He wore white scrubs and a white coat over them like a doctor, but his badge identified himself as a student. His fur was sparse, besides for the hair on his head, which had grown out. This made Iskander grimace. At first, he designed people to have no hair at all. Beards, most of all, could be so cumbersome when razors are in short supply. But then sunburns and radiation killed people off too quickly. So instead of no hair, Iskander engineered people to be completely covered in short, fine fur that was genetically manipulated to act as a barrier to radiation. Suddenly, liking beards again, he gave himself a great white mane, resembling a lion. No one else was allowed this, of course.
"Hello, Masuda. I have been getting a lot of complaints about you,"
said Iskander. The scientist shuffled nervously. "Hello, Your Excellency. I am honored to be here," said the boy, but he actually seemed quite terrified to be there. The boy's eyes were ice blue, a color model that Iskander designed himself. The color was harvested from the DNA of glowworms. Iskander more closely scrutinized the scientist's appearance. There were bags under the man's eyes, which had lost their jellyfish iridescence and seemed muddled by specks of brown. And what was that?
"Where did your tail go?"
asked Iskander. "It fell off."
"It fell off? Why didn't you seek medical attention?"
"The more I condition, the less of the rainbow light I can see. I assure you, sir, although I look a bit scary, I am not contagious. I have verified through all the tests." Iskander was shocked. The scientist was clearly naive. "Mutation is always contagious, if not bacterially, then ideologically. But all that the populace needs to know is that it is contagious. The rainbow light is nothing but a radiation emitting from Armageddon's force fields. It is a weapon being used by an extraterrestrial enemy. You do understand all this, don't you?" Iskander was trying to reason with the boy, make him realize the terrible implications of his visions. "Yes, I do, of course, Iskander. I just wanted to learn as much as I could about the light for research purposes, for the good of Artopia."
"I see,"
said Iskander.
"And what have you learned?"
"The rainbow light is some sort of sapient creature. It seems to suggest that a different type of life exists, a type of existence that surpasses the material, as if it is from a higher plane of existence rather than another planet. Armageddon is from another planet with advanced technologies like our own, nothing but science and engineering. We too can become as powerful as them if we focus our energies and remain productive." The scientist did not respond. He looked sadly at Iskander and then pitifully at his shoes. Rain and hail pounded the sky dome as the hurricane continued to batter the land and sea. The people in the city would not be able to see the lightning, but static shot out periodically where hail hit the weaker parts of the sky dome.
"Damn the storm,"
Iskander muttered as the lightning hit the dome and shook the room with its powerful force.
"Listen, Masuda, you've been in school for what, 9 years now? Only 1 in 100 ever gets as far as you. Think of all the power you will have once you graduate. As an Artopian physician, you will not only rule a part of this facility, but the people of Artopia. All you have left to do is your final dissertation. Why throw it all away now?"
"Sir, I have finished my dissertation. I want nothing more than to graduate."
"No, I have called you here because you have not finished. You haven't tested the new serums. Now the schools are overdue for their inoculations."
"I have, sir."
"And what did it do to the people?"
"I haven't tested it on the people yet, but I did test it on a goat." Iskander straightened up, annoyed, agitated, and only a bit curious.
"I told you to test it on people, not animals. Why would you not follow orders?" This serum contains more animal DNA than human, so I was afraid of what it might do to the people. I thought it would be better to give it to an animal, sir, but I believe the serum to be a success, for the goat has gained the ability to speak.
Iskander shook his head.
You have disobeyed my order. I do not want to make animals like humans. I want to make humans more like intelligent animals. Animals we can control. What is the benefit of making a goat sapient? If it were like a human, it would just complain about its food, lie to get what it wants, express itself in destructive and unusual ways. The goat would lose its blissful ignorance and use its abstract thought to question its existence until it develops existential despair or psychosis. Is that what you want?
No, sir. The scientist looked guilty. Iskander waved him from speaking.
I want everyone happy the way that goat was happy and content in its stall before you messed with it. This is how we maintain stability and keep retrospective maladaptive tendencies from occurring. If people aren't content, what is to stop them from committing crimes against each other? We will get rid of your goat.
Yes, sir, said the scientist. Iskander got up from his desk and walked to the boy, so he towered over him.
It comes down to this. All your work, all your sacrifices, and I know you have made sacrifices. Inject yourself with the serum you gave to that goat. You refused to give it to the people I sent you, so you shall be my test subject now. No, do not worry,
said Iskander when he saw the scientist's fearful expression.
It will calm your anxieties so that you won't fail to follow orders and perhaps even regrow your tail back.
But sir, please. Iskander removed a syringe from his desk and gave it to the scientist.
Tomorrow is your graduation. You either walk the stage and become an honored member of this society, or you're going to Neom.
No, not there, wept the scientist. He prostrated at Iskander's feet.
The choice is easy.
But the scientist shook his head and stood up to compose himself. No, it isn't easy, said Masuda as he shook his head and backed away.
Then it is enough,
hollered Iskander loudly, as not to be belittled by the thunder outside.
It is obvious that Armageddon has corrupted you with its visions. I can no longer help you.
Iskander pushed a button below his desk, and 2 bodyguards walked in and carried the student away. There was a knock at his door, and in walked a nurse with a young girl by her side. The girl was pretty, with red eyes, cream-colored hair, and a big yellow bow tied around an elaborate dress. "Hello, sir. Here is your daughter as you ordered, but I think she might be sick."
She is not sick. She is mute.
The nurse looked a bit confused. The girl was autistic, but most Artopians wouldn't know what that meant. It was illegal in Artopia to have children with disabilities. Genetic engineering made such mistakes impossible, yet Avery was somehow born. Iskander adopted her because her disorder made her the perfect child for him, as she could see all the secrets of the institution and not be able to reveal them. Iskander could break any rule he wanted. He renamed her, then replaced her with a genetic copy with its autism cured, so that her parents would not know the difference. Iskander made sure to spend a few hours with her a week like a normal Artopian parent. He kept the girl in the NIM unit with the other children most of the time. She'd stayed safe and hidden there, along with his more empathetic human emotions, until it was convenient for him to see her again. The girl walked off to her room in the back of the observatory, and the nurse left. He didn't bother to talk to the girl because she wouldn't understand anyway. He noticed Avery liked patterns, so he conditioned her to enjoy organizing his paperwork in alphabetical order. She went through the big boxes of papers and categorized them. He smiled and then went back to staring out of his observatory into the darkness. He assured himself that he was a good person. He was building a better world after all. A better world for his daughter, for all of Artopia. He couldn't let weak-minded, selfish individuals get in the way. He was saving everybody. He was ascending into the celestial. Despite rarely needing sleep, his eyes became heavy. He fell into a short nap. High up in the sky, unseen by the Artopians, was a brightness unlike any other, and transient rainbow light played inside the sky blue swirls and became greens and purples and blue again. It was like the way the blue fades into black and the darkness settles in like a content cat. Iskander was disturbed when he awoke and saw that the storm had only gotten worse. The lightning flashed so brightly that, for a second, he glimpsed a rainbow-colored city high up in the clouds. Chapter 13. Arrival. Midrash number 6. The Scapegoat Ritual 2 of 2. The Scapegoat Ritual throughout the Bible. Origins of the Scapegoat Ritual. The first scapegoat was Cain. He was the goat designated for Azazel, while Abel was the goat designated for the Lord. Abraham had 2 sons, just like the 2 goats in Yom Kippur. He sacrificed one and sent another, Ishmael, away to wander the wilderness. The symbology of the scapegoat ritual stems from the patriarchs. Jacob deceived his father Isaac with a goat, then Jacob was deceived by his sons with a goat, then one of those sons, Judah, was deceived by his daughter-in-law Tamar with a goat. Decades later, to leave Egypt, the ancestors of the sons of Jacob would have to perform a reverse ritual with a goat, Exodus 12 verse 1 through 12. The actual Yom Kippur ritual was founded hundreds of years later, specifically to atone for the sins of the golden calf. Today, people still worship the golden calf. When they see something beautiful and amazing, they say, "Holy cow," but when they see something terrible or bad, they say, "Oh my God." Taking God's name in vain this way is a violation of the second commandment and will not go unpunished. Exodus 20 verse 7. Because of the golden calf, Moses had to go up to Mount Sinai for another 40 days. The last thing God told Moses after his first 40 days on Mount Sinai was good tidings of the Sabbath, Exodus 21 verse 12 through 17. However, the last thing God commanded Moses the second time he had to go back for 40 days after the sin of the golden calf was the infamous, quote, "You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk," Exodus 34 verse 26. Once again, a goat was a bookend to sin. The buck, or that is the goat, stops with Jesus Christ. Title: Scapegoat Ritual Performed by the Prophets. Every Yom Kippur, the Book of Jonah is read. In the Book of Jonah, Jonah is the representation of the goat designated by Lot for God, or Azazel. Jonah had lots cast for him, just like the goats had lots cast for them, Leviticus 16 verse 8 through 10. After being thrown into the sea, red-colored seaweed wrapped around him, the same kind of seaweed that makes the Red Sea appear red, Jonah 1 verse 7 and Jonah 2 verse 5. The red ribbon was wrapped around him just as it would be on both of the Yom Kippur goats. Jonah knew he would be considered a false prophet if he traveled to Nineveh. Jonah prophesied that Nineveh would be destroyed for their sins no matter what they did. However, Jonah knew that God would revoke his decree of their destruction and forgive them if they repented. Sure enough, the people repented and the destruction that Jonah prophesied did not occur. God's Spirit found comfort in even the ignorant people of Nineveh because they repented of their sins as Jonah found comfort in his plant. Jonah 4 verse 10 through 11. Jonah allowed himself to become ostracized by his religious community for speaking falsely, so that Gentiles would seek redemption and be saved. Likewise, Jesus allowed himself to be ostracized by his religious tribe in order to bear the sins of humanity to redeem us. Prophet Ezekiel also played the role of the scapegoat. As did many prophets, he was exiled from Israel and ate terrible food in the wilderness for over a year to warn Israel of their coming punishment in the hope that some would repent and turn back to righteousness. End of Midrash. Setting: the festival of Yom Kippur, late evening of day 1, 6 days remaining. Rocky coast outside Artopia. Perspective: Jade. Jade peered out of a brown cloak with a hood as he stood on a protruding part of the beach. Underneath it he wore a tallit, and the sides of his hair were long. He was watching for lightning. According to the ancient Hindus, lightning is secret utterings of truth from heaven crashing down to earth. Truth that man can't understand for longer than an instant, and yet so powerful they illuminate even the darkest nights. So much lightning was crashing into the waves as a wonder why the sea wasn't boiling over. He was looking for any sign of the Rainbow Castle. They say that the castle can be seen clearest on nights that are dark and stormy. Jade helped manage a small community of illegal undergrounders called the Friends from Zion. They lived 100 feet underneath the desert sand in the remains of New York City. The city was buried by water and sand after a hydrogen bomb erupted off the coast. He rarely came to the surface. When he did, it was to glimpse the Rainbow City and say a prayer. Jade sang an old song. Where dips the rocky highland of Sleuth Wood in the lake, there lies a leafy island. It was a poem called The Stolen Child by William Butler Yeats, concerning old Irish peasantry myths of fairies beguiling children to come away with them. The song represented children who were forgotten, mistreated, or died too early in life. In the poem, the lost children were stolen away and taken to an island paradise separated from the rest of the world. The children's souls waited on a little island between now and eternity for the day heaven finally arrived to earth and they could come back again. Jade sang as he watched the sea and sky for any changes. The ocean reminded him of the people of Artopia, thousands of people drifting back and forth, neither returning nor coming, the salt lapping at their sides as if to add flavor so they could better be consumed. Where flapping herons wake the drowsy water rats, there we've hid our fairy vats
full of berries and of reddest stolen cherries.
Suddenly, a rainbow light lit up the shore. For a second, Jade thought he saw, in the light, washed up along the coast, a young girl stranded amongst the rocks. Then he did a double take but saw nothing, just his imagination again. Sometimes his mind would wander, and he'd hear or see ghosts from the past, the beeping of chemicals synthesizing alarms and the waking dead. He checked the coast one more time for any signs of life before returning to FFZ. He found nothing. Nevertheless, he made sure to sing the last part of the song to her, the personification that his mind's eyes materialized from the dark and turmoil of the waters. Although the girl may not be real, she symbolized to him all the lost children.
Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand.
There were 2 massacres of the innocent depicted in Scripture. Moses's and Jesus' generation were killed by the rulers of the time, many by drowning. Exodus 1 verse 22. Surely, these were the 144,000 who have the Father's name written on their foreheads, who have the special privilege of being raised in heaven, as together they make up the first generations of both the first and second covenants. Revelation 7 verse 4, 14 verse 4. Of all those redeemed for mankind as firstfruits of God and the Lamb, only they would be able to sing the new song. Having been delivered by the waters and the wild, the 144,000 will walk upon the crystal waters before the throne. That sea of glass, as if it was mingled with fire, so resplendent is it with the glory of God. But the children will no longer be children. They shall return to the earth as soldiers where they have, quote, gotten the victory over the beast and over his image and over his mark and over the number of his name. Revelation 15, verse 2-4. Setting: the festival of Yom Kippur, morning of day 2, 5 days remaining, the morning after the storm. Perspective: Kitty. Everything was blurrier than usual. I tried focusing on a gray spot in the sky as it wavered back and forth. Then I realized it was a seagull. I made it to the shore. The gull, realizing I was not dead, honked and flew off into the red gilded sky. Assuming it was not John Livingston's seagull, I was somehow alive, on Earth, and an appropriate planet and dimension for me to be. It was the morning after the storm. I squinted my eyes to the fiery red sun above. It was a Saturn-like sun from eons ago, and Saturn was allegedly a red dwarf during the dragon's reign on the Earth. The refracted light covered the desert in an eerie purple haze. They say the truest beauty is in the harshest land, and that God can be found there with those with open eyes, but I could hardly open my eyes against the fierce sandy winds of the Artopian desert. I determined by the angle of the waning light that I had perhaps 3 hours left of daylight before the moonless and starless night took over. I was defenseless. Mutated creatures would quickly find and eat me if I didn't make it to shelter. I got up and scanned my new surroundings. A good whiff brought me to my senses. There were flopping fish gaping open-mouthed at me, and the rotten smells of them thereafter. Strewn amongst the fish and seashells were broken weathered bones, the remains of the people who died during the great wave deluge that buried the coastal cities. I flopped the fish back in the ocean and then looked hazily over the beach. I was like one of those fish, but also like a fisherman. Jesus calls the fishermen disciples to cast the nets, that is the gospel of the kingdom, to bring the fish, mankind, back to the land, which is to God righteousness, out of the seas, that is the nations, to be together on the seashore amidst the grains of sand, the sons of Abraham, to inherit the promised land. Reference The Mystery of the 153 Fish by Ben Burton. It was Yom Kippur, and I only had 5 days left to save Artopia before the world as we knew it ended. I was tired and smelling of dried seaweed, and the remains of that were clinging to my hair. Nevertheless, I began the trek to Artopia. It was 10 years since I was sentenced to death here. Perhaps this was even the same coast where they sent me adrift. In the distance, the mountainous, monstrous boundary of Neom cut the sky like a huge tooth, as did the other peaks. Artopia sat alone in the desert, needing only the protection of its giant sky dome. From what I have learned, the town of Neom was destroyed long ago. They would have remembered Tosh, but that was no longer my name. I was now Kitty, and I no longer had to cover myself in ash. There was no point. There were only 5 days left. I walked over the remains of the old New York City. Artopia was once the land of opportunity, the land of the free, of apple pie, of the great bald eagle. Unfortunately, the bald eagle went extinct. Its nesting grounds were destroyed to grow apples for the pie, and one could only keep their freedom of life if they kept their mouths shut, unless it was to eat pie, and any complaints to themselves. but I suppose the pie was good. All the towers and buildings of the once great metropolis city were knocked over. One stood taller than them all, although it was broken off in the middle. It was a gleaming, twisted, octagon-shaped tower. It stood in front of the city, like the Statue of Liberty before it was swept away. The broken tower gave off an eerily low moan as the sandy winds blew through its broken windows and hollow halls. The other skyscrapers struck out of the sand like melted sandcastles. There was no level ground. The land was made up of fallen buildings and sand. Walking through the ruins was like trying to walk through the Grand Canyon, as if it was spliced with the Carlsberg Caverns National Park. As I walked over the rubble, periodic warnings were emitted from installed intercoms.
Danger! Radiation levels are lethal. It is a federal offense to trespass in Level 5 danger zones. This area is contaminated, and those entering will contract disease and genetic damage. Violators will be arrested. Virtual tours can be assessed online. Warning.
But I did not heed the warnings. Artopia was known for its fear-mongering. The remains of 6 feet apart markers on the floors popped out at weird angles over the sands. The sidewalks were upside down, pushed straight up against the building, or toppled over onto each other, bunching the 6s all up together. In the distance, I heard howls and barks of animals fighting. I had never seen a creature before. Trying to remain hidden, I shimmied in between twisted steel and through windows of floors that once reached 80 stories high. I had seen monsters and shadow things, but the creatures were mostly confined to the desert. Many of them were born from the flames of nuclear weapons, or supposedly from the radiation therein. I imagined the creatures as serpentine, like things with tongues that flickered like hot flames. I jumped when a jackalope jumped out in front of me. I was scared, thinking it was a killer creature, but it harmlessly bounded away. Artopian scientists sometimes got bored and designed weird animals that they set free into the desert. The silhouette of the Artopian sky dome was only about 10 miles in the distance. Nearly 1 million people lived there. The sky dome glistened, the color of pearly white, with the institution forming a slitted pupil down the middle. It was like the dragon was watching through the city's protective dome. I shivered and kept on walking. Artopia was much colder than the island of Key. The air was also hard to breathe. Even though I kept my shirt over my face, sand turned to sticky mud in my mouth. My skin quickly turned red and raw from the rough winds, and I could not help but bow down to them as I walked, making sure as I did that no pictures of idols were present, as I would never bow in front of those. I could see why many Artopians did not leave their dome city. Despite the distracting weather, I kept a lookout for artifacts of the old New York City, but there seemed to have been an enormous fire that burned everything up. Nothing but ash marked everything. That is, until something caught my eye. It was a calendar nailed to a wall, still stuck on the day it all ended. It was very dirty, but I could make out a picture of a person dressed in red festive clothes. Something about the person didn't seem quite right. I walked up towards it, trying to get a better look, but the wind kept knocking the bottom up. I jumped back in time to see a large Komodo dragon-looking creature drag its belly over a wall. It flicked its tongue out and then lifted itself and ran straight for me. Unable to run as quick as the creature, I used the climbing abilities I learned while hunting with my tribesmen on the island of Key and managed to lose it over some walls. I did not stop running. The dusk was disappearing and encasing the horizon. Long red-yellow remnants of the day streaked the sky as if dragged across the stratosphere. The red color was caused by sulfate aerosols and ash combinations that blocked the sun's blue rays. The closer the sun got to disappearing behind the smog, the redder it appeared. At 3:30, it shined brightest right before disappearing. It was as if the sun was oozing out a pool of blood that darkened until the entire world was cast into darkness. Jesus was crucified on 33 AD at 3:33 p.m., turning the sky dark red. His death was the beginning for mankind, but with this beginning, he was also showing us what the world would look like in the end days. Now, at 3:33 p.m., the sky turned red every day. I ran out of time. The last of the finger sunlight met its slumbering resting place. There was still no sign of the floating rainbow city that had led me there. In the waning light, I could just make out a figure walking towards me from the city. This must be an Artopian, I thought. Here would be my first chance to try and evangelize someone from the Artopian city. "Hello," I called out. "What is your name?" "I'm Kitty." I received no reply. At a second glance, the shadowy figure did not look human, but it also did not look like a creature. I hated my terrible eyesight. The whatever it was walked in shaky cloven feet and looked just like a goat. said the goat when it got close enough for me to pet. With relief, I saw that this was just a regular goat, not a creature that would try and eat me. Hello, I said to the goat. Are you a pet? Are you the goat designated for Azazel? I knew, of course, that the Artopians did not celebrate Yom Kippur, and that finding the goat here on the holiday was just a coincidence. More kids! We need more kids! Bawled the goat in a strange human dialect. This was some sort of GMO goat. I shook my head in response because I hadn't seen any baby goats, as they are called kids. It looked up at me with floppy ears and confused bulbous eyes. It's okay, I said to it. I'm going to shepherd you. I moved in front of the goat and tried to push it back towards the Artopian city. I knew that it couldn't survive in the desert. It bawed irritably in defiance and took a couple bites out of my grass skirt. Ow! All I'm trying to do is save you. I hoped the real Artopians would not be this difficult. I pushed the goat forward, but it bucked at me and ran off rebelliously. During my efforts to save the animal, everything had become pitch black. I gave up and hurried on towards a pink neon sign flickering in the distance. I could just make out the words Artopia on it. The goat bleated loudly in the darkness, but then the bawing stopped. Hell broke from its chains as breakneck crashing of footsteps shook the ground. Horrible goat screams and roars pierced the sandy air. I screamed too and ran as fast as I could. The light's head grew stunningly fast, as sometimes the darkness can make things feel farther than they really are. Please, please be open. I prayed as I ran to the door. I pounded on it, but there was no handle. Angry footsteps thundered towards me at lightning pace. The goat was no longer bawing. I looked up at the pink flickering light pleadingly. Then miraculously, the door had slid into the wall, and I was siphoned inside.